All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back for another awesome episode of the Fit 40 podcast. Today, we have another incredible guest with us. We have Dr. Brandon Parker in the house. He's an expert at helping you build strength and mobility so your body never holds you back. He is a strength coach turned chiropractor. So, honestly, I have never met somebody taking that path, and I cannot wait to pick his brain on all things movement. And also, he's a big fan of simple nutrition, which we're a big fan of around here. So, cannot wait to get this party started. Dr. Parker, welcome to the show.
Hey, man, I appreciate you having me on. Every time that I'm on somebody else's podcast, I feel amazing just because like I'm always the bridesmaid, never the bride. I love to use that phrase, but that's how it feels, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm always asking the question. So if halfway through this podcast I start to turn into interviewer mode, just check me, because I might actually do that.
That's fair. That's fair. I'll let you know. But I mean, as everybody who has been a listener of this podcast knows, we are totally cool with going off the rails and switching spots. So I'm good with it. But I will kick it off with the first question, which is I know one of the things that I have seen in your media is all about like your story as far as how your health has framed your learning. And I know from strength and conditioning, it's like we have one way of looking at it, and then you take that education to the next level with Cairo, and you're just like, okay, this is a whole other level. So,
Mhm.
what was that whole transition like between going from where you were at, going through the health stuff, building your business, and all that entails?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, like, it's funny when you have to like reflect on what happened, you start to pick up on different things. And it all started with the fact that I was that kid that was always trying to follow in my brother's footsteps. He was 6'5", well, is 6'5", 300 pounds. Naturally, he has a Division I scholarship just handed to him. Granted, he was a very good football player, but he has the frame to
Must be
fill out.
nice.
Yes, exactly. And because I had that unspoken of expectation to kind of follow in his footsteps, I had to become obsessed with human performance, right? How do I get bigger? How do I get faster? How do I get stronger? Because I'm not growing inches overnight, right? So, as we were talking off air, I was just consuming everything that I could to try to perform my best. And eventually, what happened was I just became to the realization that the playing at the next level was not a real possibility for me. So you get the next best thing. Well, I just spent the last 4 years becoming an obsessed maniac of performance. Maybe I'll just start to coach those who did get to the next level. And that's where I went to University of South Florida and got my undergraduate in exercise science and also my certification as a strength and conditioning coach. From there, I went to a private gym and started to train professional athletes where it was my job to make them as strong and as mobile as possible so they didn't get injured because you make your money on the field, not on the sideline. And what I started to realize that when your clients are playing a collision sport, you can only do so much, right? Like as a conditioning expert. And what I didn't like was when they were getting their information from a doctor, it was, hey, you injured this, go ahead and do nothing for the next 6 weeks and then come back and see me. And we know now with the current literature, if you are injured and you do nothing, you actually put yourself in a situation where you're more prone to injury than before because you're deconditioned. So I said, that's it. I'm going back to school. I don't want to ever have to go off somebody else's recommendation that I know is bad. So I went to chiropractic school where I learned quickly that I was somewhat of a black sheep there, just because I was a strength and conditioning specialist and I was a movement first practitioner. But I learned how the body moved. I learned how the body operated nutritionally, and it gave me the scope of practice that I needed to, I would say, be the person that I think people deserve when they're trying to move and feel their best. So shortly after that was I got into practice. I got into practice. I accidentally ran over my wife's foot. She needed surgery, two surgeries to fix that foot. And it was the most stressful time of my life, right? I had to be the breadwinner of a business that I just started. I had to be the housekeeper, and I also had to be my wife's caretaker as a husband, but also caretaker as a rehab expert. And as somebody who had compartment syndrome, my wife had it was a single digit chance of full recovery. So being the guy that did that to her And then also
You're never off
being,
the hook.
oh, never. I get foot rubs galore.
Yep. You're the guy that is locked in for foot rubs for life. You have no way out of it.
I will say a happy ending here.
Okay.
She's moving and feeling her best, but in that time where I literally had no time to prioritize my health, I had to scale everything down. I had to simplify everything. I said, if I only had 3 hours to give my health and wellness, what does that look like? And that's kind of how I came up with my approach, where I was realizing I was making gains. I was actually improving my health, and I have blood markers to prove it with only 3 hours of focused work when it came to my health and wellness. So that's kind of like my story in a nutshell. I hope it wasn't too long or
Oh
long-winded.
no, that was very concise and honestly way shorter than many previous guests. But when it comes to the 3 hours, just for clarity, that's 3 hours a week.
Yeah, yeah. So 3 hours per week. Usually the approach I take and the approach that I recommend other people, it's about 15 to 20 minute sessions 5 days a week. And that actually comes out to being under 3 hours. Yeah.
Nice. Very
Yeah.
nice. And I'm glad that you laid that out there because that gives us a lot of avenues that we can go. And I want to dive into pretty much all of it. But I want to revisit a topic that we talked about right before we hit record. And you briefly mentioned it when you went to Cairo school. You're a little bit of the black sheep.
Yeah.
And I think Cairos get a horrible name on social media for some bad eggs. And I think people, general public, doesn't realize there are different camps in the
Yes.
chiropractic space. So how would you explain it to somebody when you like to just let them know that a lot of us are doing the right things and helping patients, but unfortunately there's some bad eggs.
Yeah, yeah. The best way I can explain it is you have to understand that our traditional schooling is slow to change. Even though evidence points one way, we have to learn a certain way because the thing that allows us to become a chiropractor, our boards, are not changing. So if the tests don't change and our school gets basically they get graded on our ability to pass the boards. Therefore, their curriculum is always going to be outdated. So everything is basically regulated by that test. So, unfortunately, we have this situation where I would say there's a large portion of our curriculum is great, but there is some stuff that if you don't have the analytical mindset, you get stuck into this box of what most people know chiropractors to be, which is you come in, they say that your spine's out of whack, and then we're going to pop a bone back into place, and that should fix everything. Whereas what research shows is we're not moving bones at all. We are rapidly stretching a joint, which is going to have a neurological or just a nervous system reaction that temporarily makes an area feel better. So if you are somebody that's like, I want somebody that's going to give me a long-term solution, some things that I would love for you to think about is if the chiropractor is trying to give you an x-ray and you don't need an x-ray, you didn't get in an accident or fall or anything like that, chances are they're old school chiro, you want to find somebody else. If they are not explaining the solution to you in a way that you understand and they give you the roadmap without some type of paywall, go the other way, right? A doctor's job is to educate you and make you feel empowered. And if you don't feel that on day one, find somebody that's willing to sit with you and be able to do that because there are chiropractors that do that. But there are, I will say, because of our scope of practice being so wide, we have so many different flavors of chiropractic. So that day one, just have a just have an analytical thought process, see if it's a right fit for you, and see if they're able to give you the roadmap. I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely. And I think also too, one of the things that comes up in pretty much any field is that there are a population of people that once they get that piece of paper, the learning just stops. And
Yep.
they're like, I've learned everything I need to learn. I'm board certified, and that's that. It's not, oh, let's see what the latest research says and keep up to date. It's nope, I did what I need to do. I'm burnt out. I'm done.
Yep. Yep. It's hard to learn. It is hard to learn and to be in in a schooling that we were getting a new class every 12 weeks and we were getting tested pretty rapidly. I understand why it gets so tiring. And then on top of that, most people don't know this. Chiropractors aren't like physical therapists, even though we have practically the same scope of practice. You have a nice floor when you're a physical therapist because you are getting referred patients from doctors. Whereas a chiropractor, it's a grind. You are a business owner. You have to get people in your doors. So to become a business owner, you have to create six or seven, I should say, develop six or seven different skills on top of finding time to also learn what's the latest research. So I understand why it can be so hard, but that's the job you signed up for, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like it's kind of like the firm parenting, right? Like, look, I
Yeah.
understand, but you still have to do it, right?
Yep, exactly. And as you're saying that, I'm like, it's pretty much everything that our mutual friend Justin Rabinowitz says, because I know like when I was originally like getting into training, Justin taught me so many good things. And then as time goes on, you see social media trashing chiros. I'm like, no, there's good ones out there. We just need
Yeah,
to know how to identify them.
exactly.
And I think one
Exactly.
of the tags that I've started to look for, especially, is like when someone calls themselves like a rehab chiro, because then they operate in that space of we're going to do this similar to physical therapy, evidence based, and we're going to make sure that the goal is rehab, not just get you stuck on a plan where you come back never and there's no end goal in sight.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that would be a good way of going about it. If their approach is movement based or movement is the priority and the thing is, there's nothing wrong with getting adjusted or getting manual therapy or things
Yeah.
like that, but it's a cherry on top. Whereas the exercise is going to give you a long lasting benefit. So I think that is a good way of looking at it as well.
Yeah, and I think another benefit too, like I know Justin used to do this as well, and I know you do this too, is like you look at how people move. You don't just put them on a table and
Mhm.
pop, pop, pop. It's okay, let's see how you squat. Let's see how you do your push-ups. Like, and this might give us a key into why you are in pain.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's something that was pretty counter. I would say it's pretty shocking to some people is they come in, they'll say something along the lines of like, I'm experiencing XYZ pain during this movement. It's like, all right, do it. Do it right now. Like I got to see it. And then sometimes when I have my lifters come in, they'll be like, yeah, I only notice it at 3:15. I'll ask them, how sore are you? You kind of, are you feeling fresh? And like, yeah. It's like, all right, cool. We're going to load up 3:15 or at least something close to
Let's find
it.
out.
Because I gotta see what's going on. And I think that is the best approach because sometimes it is a head game, right? Sometimes people I don't want to say it's all in their head because that's not the case, but we can magnify pain with our perceptions. So if you feel like your lower back is fragile, then chances are the next time you use your lower back in a let's say a hinge movement, a deadlift, chances are you're going to have magnified pain signals in that area. So having me there, I can educate you, saying that looked great, and we can quiet down or dampen some of the signals that are going on.
Yeah. And that confidence is such a huge factor because, I mean, even if we were to take it to the extreme and say it's total placebo effect, placebo works. Like, if just
1000%.
having confidence in yourself can potentially work.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And now, when it comes to certain things that you do see when you get people moving, when you're screening them, are there some commonalities that you catch? Like, you catch yourself being like, another one of these, another one of
Mhm.
those. Like, any recurring issues that you're like, a lot of people struggle with this.
Yeah, I think it's because of I would say the underlying narratives that we've been told for a very long time, where don't squat with your knees going past your toes. Don't deadlift. It's really bad for your back. Don't press in a certain way because it's bad for your shoulders. You have these people moving like robots. And when they're moving like robots because they're afraid that they're going to hurt themselves because they don't understand how truly resilient they are, right? We've been told, like I've heard this from plenty of patients telling me that they explain their spine to be a jelly donut, right? Like their spinal nerves is is just gentle as a jelly donut. So of course, when they bend over, they think that they're going to explode their lower back. And now when with that understanding, that means they avoid movements that use their lower back. That area becomes weaker, therefore more susceptible to injury. And then it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Ah, my lower back's super fragile. It's because you've been avoiding exercising it for years now. Of course it's weak. So the big thing that I notice is people being fearful of movement because people have casted a false narrative over it. And if I could create, and this is what I try to do, I try to create an environment where it's like, hey, when's the last time you picked something up off the floor? Oh, today? Can you show me how that looked? All right, pause. Do you notice how your lower back is bending forward right now? Yeah. Any pain? No. Awesome. Do you see how it's more about the load than the actual movement itself? And then you see the light bulb. Now you see there's a gateway or an opportunity to smash false expectations. And that's where you actually start to see the rehab, the start of the rehabilitation process. Cause it's almost like, oh my God, there's a whole new world outside of what I thought my back can do. And that's what we're supposed to be here for. People shouldn't leave our office feeling doom and gloom. They should be well informed of what's going on and how they can move forward to improve their current situation.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up the concept of form and load because I think what a lot of like general public don't understand is that certain form can lift heavier load, and when
Mhm.
you put heavy load on form that cannot handle it, that's usually where it goes no bueno.
Exactly. Exactly. It's to your point, it's exactly what you said is there is going to because what I when I say that sometimes take people take it almost in an extreme fashion. Well, okay, form doesn't matter. It's like I didn't say that either. There's always going to be a position that you're going to be more mechanically efficient. And when we're lifting, it makes sense that we should be utilizing a mechanically efficient position. However, I think there's also time and places to put ourselves in something that is not as efficient and resembles more of a day-to-day lifestyle, but it has to be in a tolerable dose. A bicep curl is safe. But if I told you we're going to do 1,000 bicep curls every day of the week, you'd be like, that's insane. That will rip my bicep off. Of course. So it
Yes.
does really come down to the dosage of everything.
Yeah, and I love bringing up the concept of dosage, especially to the golfers and the tennis players, because
Mhm.
talk about 1,000 movements. Like for that first month, I don't know how many people, when we were training them, like that first month of spring in Jersey, when everybody hits the golf course, I'm like, so how's the elbow feeling? And they're just like, "Ah, I played like 18 or 36 and it's not feeling so great." I'm just
Yeah.
like, well,
You,
yeah,
you'll see I have these tennis players and golfers come in, especially now because it's season, right? You'll have, all right, how many did you swing? He's like, well, it was a bad round, so over 100 strokes. And I was like, okay, all right, that makes a lot of sense. And then they go, oh, and I did this. Oh, and I did this. And it's just like, okay, so let's map this out. Normally you're doing 50 strokes, and that was you at the driving range. Okay. Now you amplified it to double and you added stuff after that. Does it make sense that your body is probably stressed out right now? Like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then they start to realize that, oh, maybe I'm prolonging this injury because I'm not giving my body the recovery that it deserves.
yeah, and I think one of the big concepts, which is basically what you were laying out, that a lot of people need to grasp, especially as they age, is this concept of graded exposure, where it's
Yes.
like, can we just get a little touch of it instead of just getting a full dose day one? And
Oh,
then
yeah.
when you get that little touch, add on, add on, add on, and you adapt as you go instead of just seeing whatever your body can give you that day.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you brought up that phrase because it's when people see here's a great example because we're this is going to be on an online format that means most people are going to be exposed to this type of content is if you see somebody doing a circus trick, the natural inclination is wow, that's really dangerous for the body. Well, not for that person. That person has gradually exposed himself or herself to these positions over time. So they had the necessary strength to do the movement, but also ward off any risk of future injury. Now, if somebody that hasn't been practicing that, then yeah, it's probably extremely dangerous. But that can be for literally any movement. You can think of the most safest movement, and I can say, all right, at 1,000 pounds, it's no longer safe anymore. So I think if we take that flip side of wow, the body can really do a sissy squat where it's like an extreme quadricep knee dominant move, that means that if I take the time to really rebuild my knee joint, I can get a lot more function out of this. So if you are somebody that's dealing with aches or pains in the knee joint, please understand that there's an opportunity that you can maximize that area to make it feel better, to function better, and at the very least, we can ward off future injury if the two first things I said are not possible.
Yeah, and I think especially now because this is most likely coming out in January, I believe, and there's going to be a lot of New Year's resolutioners that want to go for a run first thing because they're feeling motivated. Like I think of those runners and I'm like, if only we could get away from let's run until we want to puke to why don't we do like 30 seconds of a jog, 30 seconds of a walk for 10, 20 minutes and then start there and improve from there.
It's interesting. I would love your thought on this. I mean, we both know what happens. I just don't know why. And it's very, I mean, I can think of back in the old days when I used to do this, right? Like, so I was on bodybuilding.com, right? And it goes, here's a great routine. And like, it was kind of like select your own path type deal. And the
Yeah.
first question was beginner, intermediate, advanced. Did I click beginner? God, no. I went straight to the advanced. I'm like, I'm advanced. And I didn't have any type of
I
training
think we
experience
took the
underneath
same
me.
bodybuilding.com test.
So it's kind of like it makes me wonder like what is the human nature behind not taking the baby steps? Do you think it's like shiny object syndrome? What's your thoughts on that?
I honestly like I've wondered the same thing because I think it's too easy to say that people like just want to make up for lost time, which does play a role, but it's like we have these misconceptions or these predisposed like these ideals that were like it's got to be this, it's got to be that. And it's like it almost like when you actually talk to people, it never lines up that way and you're just like, "Huh. So what is it?" But I honestly think it's like when there's this motivation hit, there's that knowledge that it's going to fade. And you're like, well, I want to make the most out of this. So I'm
Yeah.
going to go balls to the wall, regardless of what's going to happen. I know this is going away. So I want to make the most out of it. That's my personal
Yeah.
thought for most people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a couple I go in a couple directions and that's part of why part of what I think as well. I do think like this might be more in the male dominant side, but the ego side of saying like yeah, I am a true beginner, that's pretty hard to say. Especially like I've noticed this with my even with my female clients as well where they used to identify as an athlete, but then of course at the age of 30 maybe their job aspirations got a little bit too much of a priority. Maybe they have a family now, and then years go on. Now they're 40 plus, and they realize that they're a shell of them former selves. So they're trying to make a change. And what do? They go right back to what they did before when they were probably intermediate or advanced. And then, unfortunately, that's when they come see me in the office and they go, "Well, I did something really small. I did 3 mile run." What? 3 mile run? When's the last time you ran 3 miles? Oh, years ago. Okay. Let's plot this out on a bar graph. You see how this doesn't make any sense, but I think that has to do with it. I think another part of it is, you know what, that'll be going down a rabbit hole. But like I think that is like the main thing that
Yeah.
I think that most people just need to realize that like if they can take the baby steps, and it might be boring, I think that not only will it guarantee your success, but it will really lower their chances of injury as well, which we all know when you're injured and you're down and out, it's pretty demotivating, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's really what most people need a professional for is not to give them this super complex program to be like, you got to do this, 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 and this. I think most people need a professional in their corner just to be like, I know it's boring, but it is going to pay off. Just
Oh, yeah.
stick with the process. I promise it'll pay off.
I totally agree with that. It's the first thing that we do with our programming is movement restoration. I take people through a mobility screening. I just see how they're moving. A great example, what I see often is people's inability to have their knees drift apart during the squat. We call it external rotation. And when the knees can't come out, their squats turn more like into a deadlift.
Mhm.
And it makes sense that if everything they do when trying to bend over, squat down is more lower back dominant, it makes sense why that area is super under recovered. So, um, during that point, the first phase is like, hey, these are gonna be really boring stretches. But if you stick with it, your knees will drift apart further in your squat. And now you can actually load your glutes, which is actually the real problem here. If we can build stronger glutes, like you're gonna be a powerhouse. And once to your point, having not only that ability to explain that, but also remind them because you can tell them up front they're not listening. But when
No.
they hit that point where they're frustrated and you remind them the why, then you can kind of bring them back to baseline and they don't have to self-sabotage themselves.
Yeah, and I think especially with the population you work with, they're correct me if I'm wrong, they're usually in pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
which could be an incredible feedback tool. Like I know people run away from pain and they don't want to experience it, but it's like at the end of the day, that's instant feedback of like, okay, this is why I should be doing this.
Yes. Yeah. In yes, I agree. And I would say that it's a tool that we have to play with a grain of salt, right? Like,
Hmm.
but I
It's
do
like
think it's
fire. You
amazing.
don't want to burn your hand, but you can get a little close.
Yeah, exactly. Because here's the thing, is like we know pain gets influenced by so many things, right? Like as I alluded to earlier, like if there's fears or preconceived notions that your body is going to get injured, that little bit of discomfort, that one or two, can be a four, five, six, right? Because you were scared. Likewise, that 1 to 2 out of pain can be elevated as well if you just haven't been getting a lot of sleep and you're super stressed out. But to your point, I think it's great feedback because you can actually open up a conversation, say, well, look at your programming. We really didn't use a lot of your knee. So you do have an elevated knee pain right now. What do you think's going on? And we can use it as an awareness tool. It's like, well, you did tell me that drinking a little bit of alcohol can make me inflamed. So that could be playing a role. Awesome. I'm not going to tell you to stop drinking alcohol. I think we are both on the same page here. That being said, at least you're not catastrophizing thinking that you made your knee worse, right? So I agree. I think it's a really good tool. We just have to make sure that they understand that pain isn't something that's going to be linear, right? It's not going to always go
Yeah.
down. It's not going to always go up. It's kind of just dependent on the current status of the body.
Yeah. And for anybody who's unaware of exactly like what the causes of pain are, because I know I've seen that graphic that has like 1,000 points going on, and I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh, it's not somebody just hurts themselves for like one reason. Like, what are some out of those 1,000 points? Like, if you were to explain it to somebody for the first time, how would you explain like the causes of pain in general?
Yeah. So I kind of like look at things in a very simplistic way. Like, of course, some of the people that are well into the pain research would probably be like, well, I'd put it a little bit more, but let's just keep it really simple. Um, if we looked at our overall body energy and ability to withstand stress, or I can use the word resilience, think of it as like a gas tank, right? Every day, ideally, we have a full gas tank. And anytime that we use our energy, whether that be exercise, day to day chores, going to work, we are draining that gas tank. And things like, let's just say something pops up in your email, work related stress, that can drain your gas even further. Maybe you are doing a little bit more extra things at work physically, that can drain your gas tank. But also think about it like this, like, in the ideal world, yeah, we would wake up with a full gas tank, right? But what if the kids wake you up in the middle of the night? What if that stress has been keeping you up? What if your nutrition isn't actually where it needs to be? You're not starting with the full gas tank anymore. Now you're starting at like half tank. And we know when the body is depleted and it doesn't have a lot of willpower left, it's going to be more susceptible to injury. And if you're not getting injured, we know that the symptoms that you have, like pain related symptoms, will be also magnified. So that's kind of the analogy that I use. If somebody's really inflamed, how's your gas tank? How's your sleep been? How's your nutrition been? Has your stress been through the roof? And if the answers are like, oh, those are all fine, okay, let's actually dive into physical stresses now. What did you do differently? Did you go on, let's say, a 6 mile drive, or I'm sorry, 6 hour drive? Some people, they just get jacked up because they're in one seating position for a very long time. Did you
They're
modify
sitting
that
at their
situation?
desk in a certain way that pisses off whatever joint is angry, and you're just
Exactly.
like, well,
Hmm. So to answer your question directly, like the reason why everything influences the body is because everything, good or bad, is a stress on the body, right? Going on a roller coaster, you enjoyed that roller coaster, right? It's still stress. Your heart still went up. Your nervous system's still firing. You are now more tired from it. So I think if you look at it through that lens, I think it gives you a little bit more power. Where it's like, I just need to sleep a little bit more. My knee's okay. Like I chances are I didn't injure it. I just need to sleep a little bit more. I need to dial in my nutrition because I know I feel a little bit more inflamed. And like I said, it puts the person back into the driver's seat versus like, I have a disc bulge. I can't fix it, even though they do heal with time, but I can't fix it and things like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because when people do get hurt, their first thought is always, what was that movement that I did? What was the exercise that caused this? When it's like you probably your first thought is should be, how am I sleeping? How's my stress and all that? And it kind of reminds me of like 6, 12 months ago. I don't know, Eugene Teo.
Yeah.
Yeah, he like tore his pec and he goes on to his social media and he's like, "Let me just tell you, this and this were going on. It was not the movement, but I had crap sleep. I was traveling and I did a weight that I should have been able to do and something just popped."
Yep. Yep. That's something that I think is super important to. I think if there had to be one takeaway from this whole podcast is just managing your stresses and being able to sleep and managing your nutrition. And as we both kind of just alluded to, like simple nutrition goes a long way. And I know that sounds crazy in the social media realm because you have people putting random foods on a wooden cutting board. You have other people blaming insulin for fat storage and things like that. But just keep this in mind. If somebody is out there trying to give you a complex reason as to why you aren't getting your results, they're trying to confuse you so they can sell you a solution. And if they can't break it down so it makes sense to you, and it actually is in alliance with all the other medical professionals and the research, the body of research, I would just basically unfollow them, or you click the three little dots at the top right corner and say, don't show me this anymore, because you're just going to be susceptible to wasting your money, making your health even worse. Because if you take those types of supplements, they're not regulated, right? And once again, you're wasting time.
Yep. Yep. And the supplement thing is huge now, and I don't think enough people actually know about that. Is the fact that, like, I don't know how many years ago it was, maybe like 20, 30, the supplement industry went out of their way to lobby and throw millions and millions and millions of dollars to be less regulated because the government did want to put regulations on it to the point where it basically would have killed the industry because supplements overall, most of them don't do shit.
Right.
So it's like it should be an obsolete thing, like, but it's thriving right now.
Yeah. I would love your opinion on this. So if you were to recommend some type of supplementation, what would it be?
I have a feeling we're going to be in line with this. The only one I really ever truly like will go out of my way to recommend is creatine
Mhm.
because there's just so many benefits. And actually, I'm not sure if this will come out before or after, but I just had Dr. Susan Bryan on yesterday, and we were talking about this. She's a endocrinologist who works with midlife women, and she's like,
Mhm.
creatine is the freaking best. And
Mhm.
I'm just like, yes, like more people, especially women in midlife, need to come around to the idea of supplementing with creatine.
I totally agree with that. It's at the end of the day, we have this, it's almost like a cascade effect. We're both male and female are losing muscle mass after the age of 30 pretty significantly. Of course, females will probably experience a more drastic loss because of menopause. Men go through andropause where they're losing
Yeah.
their testosterone, but I think females do get a pretty bad run of it when it comes to that. And you need to be doing everything in your power to maintain as much muscle mass as possible. I don't know if I've said this already, but I just want to make sure it's clear that when we lose muscle, we are down regulating our metabolism. So our chances of actually maintaining a weight that's fat-free mass is going to be really hard. So we're going to be more inflamed because we're going to be storing more body fat, and then we're going to be weaker and more stiff, right? Because the less strength that we have, the more susceptible we'll be to injury, and I would say, the less strength that we have in certain positions, the more likely that our nervous system won't let us get into those positions as well, and that's where you start to see compensation. So creatine is one of the things that I looked at my mom. I said, Mom, like you have to take this. Please take this. Because also you got to consider the cognitive benefits as well. So you
Yeah.
have something that's cost effective, it's not expensive, right?
Well, if you're buying the right kind, like creatine monohydrate, tried
Yeah.
and true, let's not mess with it. It's dirt cheap. Just have that. The other
Yeah.
stuff is exactly the same, or there's actually less effective, more expensive versions.
Yes. Great point. Phenomenal point. So it's ineffective if you're getting creatine monohydrate. I mean, I've only seen like one to two people have side effects on it, and it was bloating,
Yeah,
right? Like I'd never seen
It's
any.
always GI stuff, and it could be from additives, or it just could be from the dose. If you do the loading protocol, sometimes people do not respond well to that.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you got that, and then on top of that, so there it's cost effective and it helps you build muscle because it makes you stronger on that front. And on I don't recall if I said this already, but the cognitive benefits as well, right? So
Yeah,
it is,
especially short-term memory for anybody who struggles with that, myself included. I can't imagine myself without creatine.
yeah. So you got a huge upside, relatively no downside, and it's cost effective. So I'm right. I'm aligned with you on that. The only other thing that I would say, and I think you would agree with this, is like if you're dealing with a client that is having such a hard time putting on muscle because they're not eating enough protein, a whey protein or maybe a vegetarian source brand for those who prefer to eat that way would be ideal. And then if we're still talking about, let's say, vegan or vegetarian, we just got to make sure they're getting enough B12, right? Because that sometimes
Yeah.
it's that I've actually seen a client, this was back in clinic and when I was a student, who was actually B12 deficient and they were having neurological problems. Like we were like exploring, like, oh, this is like some type of advanced disease, da 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 da. No, just B12 deficiency. And that's because they just weren't getting enough in their diet. So I think that's the only couple things that I would actually consider.
Yeah, and I'm honestly at the point where I'm like, I don't even consider whey protein like a supplement anymore. I'm like, that's food.
Yeah.
Like that's part of the deal. But because it just makes life so much easier and it helps people achieve goals in a more convenient way. And it's pun intended, but it's just a shame that there's so many people going out of their way to demonize like dairy-based or certain types because they happen to be selling a different form.
Yep. And that's, I guess that would be a really cool thing for people to be aware of, or at least something they could put in their back pocket. If you were buying something because somebody told you to buy it or try to sway you to buy it, see if they have any type of upside to you buying something else, right? If I say, hey, don't buy this, you should buy a product like this, and I'm selling it or I get commission from it, that is extremely biased. I think you should get your information from somebody else.
Yeah, and that's the other problem too with the supplement industry and stuff like that. Like technically, according to what is it, FCC, you're supposed to put out there that there is a financial compensation component to what you're saying. And so many people on Instagram do not follow these rules
Yep.
at all. And they're just like that guy Bobby, what's his name?
Yeah.
Like Bobby
Yep.
approved. Like that guy's the number one culprit where it's just like I'm going to talk shit on this but not tell you I have a financial incentive
Yeah.
and you're going to go buy my thing.
Yeah, my biggest because the thing is he does it in a way that people think that it's how would I say this? A lot of clients come to me and they're like, "This guy's awesome," and it's like, I need you to watch multiple versions of his clip because he is literally saying contradicting things every time. He says
Every
this is
time.
demonized, like don't do this, and then do this, and then 3 videos later it's flip flopped, and here it is. You go to his products, the very things that he said, hey, this is going to be cancerous, toxin filled, da 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 da. It's in his products,
Yeah.
and and once again, it's like, look, I used to think this was something that you were doing to help people, and you were just misinformed, but now I understand you were doing it out of fear mongering, and you were trying to drive people to your product, and now I can't get behind that.
Yeah, I always wonder with accounts like that. I'm like, are they just very misinformed and they really do want to do well? Or are they going out of their way to ignore any contradictory evidence because they have so much financial skin in the game that it would be too painful to backtrack and be like, I was wrong?
Right. I definitely think it's that because if you look at content like a evergreen thing, like if you have a viral video that goes on, like he's probably still getting people seeing that video and then driving traffic to his product. So for him to say, "Hey, I messed up," he's literally cutting off some of his revenue source.
Yeah.
So and that's at least how I see it. And for somebody that's already contradicted himself so many times, I don't think he actually truly cares at all about the people buying his product.
Yeah.
Now I might have
And that's
Bobby show up at my house trying to fight me, but
that and I know another culprit too is like Paul Saladino, for example, because
Mhm.
I just saw his book on Spotify as like one of the ones to listen to, the Carnivore Code. Meanwhile, he has recently backtracked and actually I was impressed. I'm like this is a guy I never ever thought would buckle and say, you know what, I was wrong. And he started incorporating fruits and veggies after going for years saying that they're going to kill you.
Yeah, I give him props for saying it. I do. Um, I just hate the fact that he leveraged his title
Yeah.
to get people to go down a route that fundamentally went against all research, right? Like we know
Yeah.
for a fact, like LDL, like as an independent risk factor, does contribute to cardiovascular disease. And you're telling somebody to ignore that number because of primal code or whatever it might be, whatever arbitrary example. And it's like, no, you're literally shaving years off people's lives. And because it's
Yeah.
a slow developing disease, you're going to get away with it. Right. And that's what I don't like. And even though he backtracked, he said I was wrong, da 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 da. I think he I just saw another post of his where like he doesn't touch the receipts because there's
Yep.
BPA's on
Hey,
it. And it's
he's got to find something else to fearmonger. That's his only game. So it was fruits and veggies, but now that's out of the equation. So it's got to be receipts. I bet you he'll go on or the guy doesn't use soap either, so he's on that too.
It's um it's I think that when people do stuff like that, it really it diverts people from the things that they should be focusing on, right?
Yeah.
Like I try to take a laissez-faire because I don't like conflict. Like, okay, you want to focus on those things, you can't neglect the fundamentals. Like if your sleep is perfect, if your nutrition is perfect, if your stress is perfect, and your training is perfect, let's have the conversation. But
Yes.
until that's correct, and most people it's not, why are we even talking about it? And
Yep.
I think most people can agree with that approach. And at least it diverts a lot of confrontation, you know?
Yeah, and I think you could say that about like 99% of the things you see on Instagram, that you see videos that get you scared, that get you worried. It's like if you do those basics you just mentioned, you don't even have to pay that any attention because your body is probably resilient enough to deal with that. Like
Oh, yeah.
if you have Fruit Loops one morning because you just happen to have it in the house, but you're eating really well 99% of the time, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like you could
I
have all
and
those eyes as long as you're not as allergic to it and be totally fine.
exactly. In that same vein of thought, around this time of year or it's a holiday season, a lot of people get hyper vigilant about what they're eating.
Mhm.
And it's just like, look, our whether you like it or not, most of our American culture is surrounded around food. It's how most people share and show they share and show love. You sit around
Yeah.
a dinner table and you really connect with people. And for you to sit there and just like how much protein is this? How much calories is this? It takes away from the moment. And you're not going to put on a tremendous amount of body fat in one day, right? Not all the work that you put into this day and all the work you're going to put in after this day, this is a blip on a radar that's really not going to do anything other than ruin your day if you're hyper focused on that. And to your point earlier, it's like if you got everything in line and you're focusing on the foundations, like all these things that these people are currently thinking about wouldn't even enter their mind. Like I have
Yeah.
clients that came to me, they're just looking for performance. The whole I don't get questions about is the Fruit Loop dyes killing me? I don't get the BPA question or all that
Yeah.
because
Right.
they don't have symptoms that they can really blame or like I can say like hyper focus on and then blame some arbitrary thing on, right? They're just feeling great. So they just keep doing what they're doing. So they don't have this idea of like there's a missing link that I don't have, you know?
Yeah. I feel like that I've noticed that as well when I bring up the concept of all these things that we see as fitness and nutrition professionals with the political stuff that was going on and everything. Nobody ever really asks about it, but we see it all the time. And it's interesting that like the only people that really latch on to that stuff are people who are in this space, who see it pop up, and the people that are like pseudo health nuts that are not actually health nuts. They just like worrying about every little thing, and it eventually could potentially turn into orthorexia.
Yep. Exactly. It's a fine line, right? And back to the simplicity of everything. It's just like if you are truly worried about your health, you can squash that worry or validate it. Just get blood work. It tells
Yeah.
you. It tells you exactly where you are. It is your check engine light, if you will, right? Get
Yeah.
it done. If everything is now, you can argue about some reference ranges being out of date, sure, but that will give you a phenomenal like outlook like, oh, okay, yeah, I need to tighten up the saturated fats because my LDL is a little bit higher than it should be. Or, hey, my LDL is really high and I have a really lean eating style. Why is that? Oh, I didn't realize this, but my family has a predisposition of cholesterol buildup. And that's once again, because you spent, let's say, $100 or whatever it may be, if it's covered by insurance, you now know that you need to change this health approach so you do live for a very long time and move and feel your best. So if you truly are in this boat where you feel like something is missing, actually go to the source by checking your blood work instead of chasing random supplements. Because at that point, if you choose the supplement route, you're not really health conscientious. You're just kind of chasing a fad.
Yeah. Yeah, very well said. I think too, it like when it comes down to the blood work side of things, a lot of people get the blood work done and then it comes back that nothing's wrong with them. And they're like, but it's got to be something, but we never really take a look at the other factors, which are how are we sleeping? How's our stress management? How's our exercise and all of this stuff? But that gets put on the back burner because it's like, no, I feel like this should be a simple fix of like just this supplement.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you rounded out my point there. Yeah, because there is times where your blood work is fine, right? And you still have symptoms. And I don't want the me to sound like it's all in your head, right? I don't want to invalidate anybody that feels that way.
No, it gives
But
us
it
data.
exactly it is. It's a data it's a bunch of data points that you can get in one sitting, and it can really give you a lot of clarity. So yeah, I mean, I think that if you are some, like I said, you're really scratching your head, start there. At least it gives you a heading, and it crosses a lot of things off your list of what it could be, right?
Yeah. And if we're being honest, most people like if they feel like they're having some sort of struggle, a lot of people go to get their blood work done because of goals as far as like weight loss or body transformation. And the one thing that nobody will ever do is actually take an honest look at their nutrition. They're like, I'm exercising so well, I'm eating all of the right foods, but they never really get a tab on, or they never really get an idea of how many calories they're actually consuming.
Yep.
So, do you do anything with your approach where you bring awareness to that, or like simple strategies just to keep the calories down to a maintainable level where they can see the results like that if they're chasing it?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. So when it comes to any type of nutritional intervention, I start at the bare bones, the least friction possible. And that's going to depend on the person. Well, that starts with the conversation, but let's just say somebody is like completely green, they don't know anything about nutrition. I just simply ask them to do one thing: track your protein. And it's definitely not a novel idea, but it's the reason why most people start there is because it moves the needle the most. If you are well aware of your protein intake and you know that it's well below where it should be, you're going to start upregulating or eating more of that nutrient. So a couple things happen. You're going to, one, build more muscle over time, which is going to then spark up your metabolism, which is what most people want. Two, it's highly satiating. So that means when you eat it, you're not going to want to eat much of other things. So it takes time for that to digest, and that's why it's satiating. And then from there, I think you can agree with this. Most people are like nowhere near the amount that they should be eating to maximize their muscular health, if you will. So I
Especially
haven't
if they're in the active population, because people don't
yes.
realize like RDA is good to be above that, but if you're active and breaking down muscle tissue and building muscle, it goes way up.
Exactly. So I have people start there. And that's a great thing because everything else starts to fall in line. Because if I say, hey, we're going to track your protein, we're going to track your carbs and your fats and then calories, it gets super overwhelming. And if you're dealing with somebody that gets over analytical, then it becomes this weird game where they're trying to not eat a certain food and it's not supposed to be like that. So I start with protein and then I will then start to work in fiber. With gastrointestinal cancer and disease becoming more and more common because processed foods removes the fiber, that is the next thing that I really focus on because of how beneficial it is for our health. And not only that, once again, it makes you more full longer. And we don't
Yeah.
necessarily have the epidemic of obesity in our nation of the United States is we eat too much and we don't move enough, right? So if I can tell you to focus on two things that are going to optimize your health and actually reduce the amount of food that you eat overall, you are already you're solving one variable. Now the other one is like maybe we just go for like a 10-15 minute walk. And then we can start moving the needle in that regard. But those are like the two places I start that I feel like a lot of people are like, yeah, that's definitely manageable. It doesn't, create a lot of friction or take a lot of headspace. And then from there, we'll then maybe get into calories. But when it comes to fats and carbohydrates, I don't really go deep into them unless they have a performance goal, only because I've yet to see somebody not eat enough fats to produce hormones. And
Yeah.
I haven't had a lot of people need to maximize their carbohydrate at a specific time, like whether it be for a performance, bodybuilding show,
Yeah. I mean,
cycling event.
unless you're like a top level CrossFitter, I doubt like you really need those intra workout carbs or pre and post. It's like for most people, it's fine.
Exactly. So it's just to recap to make this concise. It's like focus on your protein, make sure that you're getting enough. Now you might have a different recommendation. I say a minimum zero point 0.7 grams per pound. That's where I'll go. Maybe a
Someone's
little bit higher.
evidence based here, people.
um, for fiber, some people go off of body weight. I just say like let's just stick with 25 grams per day. If you want to get
Yeah.
specific, we can, sure. And then calories, it's all going to be dependent on what their metabolic rate is. And the only way that we'll find that if they want to really tweak it is through tracking their calories for like a week or so and then getting a gauge on that. And what I found to be efficient, and you actually like this. Do you know who Dr. Bill Campbell is by any chance?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So
I
he
know
was my
his name
professor.
through. Oh really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I heard of him first from Lane Norton when he mentioned him on his stuff because I think that he learned from him.
Oh, so I'll tell you what, man, the guy is a gem, right? And he actually, all those are listening will really enjoy this. So he's a fat loss researcher, right? So he
He quite
dedicated the
literally does his research.
yeah, yeah. He like his whole expertise is how to lose fat and maintain as much muscle as possible. So the things that he says for this line of work that we do is Bible, right? Like it's like you have to take this to the heart.
He's
And
like one of those accounts you can look up and everything he puts out, you're like, all right, I know this is evidence based, so I don't actually have to like look it up. But if you want to, it's always there. There's always citations.
yes, yes. So there's that. And now he was telling me on my podcast that his wife just went through menopause and she was experiencing this situation where he was trying to help her. She was doing everything right, exercising, caloric deficit, and the weight wasn't really budging. So that actually took him down a path of wanting to he wanted to become an expert in menopause. So now this is
Oh,
his line of work.
yes.
So
I'm so happy to hear that.
and his approach in his laboratory for those not in menopause, because he's still doing the menopause work, is just take your current calories, drop it by 25%, and just maintain that until you hit either a plateau or you hit your goal weight. And it's as simple as that. And that's somebody that's dedicated his entire life. And he goes, yeah, if you just do that, you're good. So talk about being simple, right?
Meanwhile, there's people that are literally messaging their clients daily, like, we got to change your calories to this. We got to change it based on this, and this. And it's like, you're really complicating the hell out of a very simple process.
Yeah. And the hardest part about this journey in this process is the psychology behind it, right? And that's why we typically need somebody to guide us through it, is because we get in our own way. The complexity doesn't necessarily come with the approach. It's more so fitting it to the person in the current circumstance in which they are, right? So don't question the principles as long as you have the right principles. Question your current mood state, because that's probably what's going to have a larger impact on what's going on.
Love that. Love that. Because that's just going to drive the consistency factor, which is really what the whole name of the game is.
Oh yeah. To same line of thought. Dr. Bill Campbell on the episode, he said this. He goes, "I dedicated my whole life to this, and when I'm in a caloric deficit in a fat loss phase, I even get false expectations. I have
Yeah.
to write things on a fridge and say this is what I expect to lose in a certain amount of time." So once again, a human who has dedicated their entire career to one subject, and he's doing that one subject, and he was still second guessing it. So it's normal. It's completely normal to second guess the process.
Exactly. I know it's so easy for like as a professional to want to stand on this like soapbox and act like we know it all. We've been here, we know the pitfalls, and we're just like, no, we're just like you. We still struggle with the same shit.
Yeah.
But no, Bill Campbell is definitely a dream guest on this podcast for sure, especially after that menopause research. That would be insane. But no, that's really good to hear for people, especially who feel stuck, because I think that there is a bit of an anti-calorie sentiment online where it's like at the end of the day they matter, and people are getting confused on people saying calories don't matter when it's like physiologically that makes zero sense.
Right. Right. I think it's a I think it was once a good sentiment to say, until it got taken to the extreme where it's like, hey, calories don't matter in the grand scheme if we're talking about food composition and like overall health, like because you have that population of people that overanalyze, right? 'Cause I can
Mhm.
appreciate that sentiment of like, let's not like you are not a number. Let's stop looking at the numbers and actually just eat in a way that makes you healthy. But when they completely disregard the law of thermodynamics, then it becomes a real issue.
Yeah, because it's like, can we all agree if you were starving on an island and your hormones were horrible, you would lose weight. And if you accept that, you accept calories.
Yeah, exactly. I keep referencing the podcast, but it was such a source of good information. But he said like
Hey, I'm
with
going to
these,
be listening to it immediately as soon as we're done. So I can't
so it
wait.
comes out to Friday, so this a couple days from
Oh,
now. So
oh,
uh,
darn. I wanted to binge it today. Okay. I'll be on the lookout and I'll be sure to put it below for anybody else who wants to listen too.
yeah, it's so he was saying that in this time of menopause that yes, calories do regulate whether or not you're losing or gaining weight. But that's not the question. The question is these women, so, and it's not all women in menopause. This is a percentage of women in menopause that when they are weight loss resistant, it's not a matter of calorie deficits don't work. It's the severity in which they have to go into to actually solicit some type of result where it's like, yeah, if I gave you 20 calories, of course you're going to lose weight, but you're going to be miserable. You're not going to be able to move. And that's where a lot of women, I would say a small population of women in menopause get super frustrated because everyone else is on a calorie deficit and they're not. And they're getting results, but this person that's on a calorie deficit isn't, and they just might be a little bit more resistant to weight loss. And I think in that category of people, we should be focusing on building as much muscle as possible. So when we're out of menopause, then you can experience a caloric deficit and actually get to the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, 100%. But unfortunately, I do think that that population that is so weight loss resistant, they're so married to low calories and such little food that building muscle is damn near impossible. So it
Yep.
does take that mindset shift, right? So,
Mhm.
like, we got to get more protein, we got to get more carbohydrates in the mix so you can actually lift and get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah. Yeah. 1000%. And that's once again, it comes back to that mind shift, right? Like where it's like, yeah, you're gonna eat more calories. That's deathly scary to you. I totally get that. But think about how much energy that you're not spending right now because you're so tired. Whereas, I mean, you already know this, but maybe the people listening don't. Like, what we have the thermic effect of food, where we're literally burning calories because we're eating, right, and digesting food. You also have NEAT, which is non-exercise activity, right, where we're burning calories, fidgeting, talking with our hands like I am now. And that plays a massive role in which when we are eating food and burning calories. So when you have somebody that is chronically under eating on their calories, they are basically a shell of themselves. They stop doing these things that burn calories because the body's trying to conserve as much as they can. So yes, you can eat more calories, which will give you more energy, which in turn you'll more likely spend those calories, thus being at a net neutral when it comes to standing on the scale. So if anyone's listening and they've been afraid to upregulate their calories, maybe this is your opportunity to actually get more energy and not feel like you're starving yourself 24/7.
Yeah. And that gets into the whole concept of, I think it was John Berardi that said it, like the G flux, where it's like you add in some calories and all of a sudden you have that energy for more neat, more non-exercise activity. And all of a sudden, overall, your net burn is higher than if you ate less calories.
Yep.
So you're actually getting better results on more food.
Exactly. Exactly. It's definitely counterintuitive to the psyche, and that's why
Yeah.
us as coaches exist, right?
Yep. And for anybody who is like confused right now, just know that like it's not for it doesn't happen with everybody. And eventually you will have to get to a point where it's like that kind of like runs its course and you metabolically adapt to it. And then you have the choice of like, do I want to keep going or not? And that's when you got to deploy strategies like keeping a step count and stuff like that. So you have a baseline of activity that you're like, at least I'm doing this. I might not be blinking like crazy or fidgeting, but I'm at least doing this.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But that's it all comes down to I think what we're saying in theory is very straightforward. And then maybe it's not. Maybe like we're just at a level or I'm at a level, you're at a level this makes a lot of sense. Maybe somebody that's not in the know, it makes a little bit it's a little confusing, but I think just the complexity comes in you as a person seeing this happening to yourself and recognizing it, which I
Yeah.
think is very hard. That's why I have a coach too. Yeah, yeah, you're trying to, for me, like I'm working on my mobility. Yeah, you've been working on the front split for this year. Did you notice that you're not doing XYZ with your hips? No. I wish I knew that. Thank you for telling me. And it's the same idea with nutrition, strength, and anything. Having that outside perspective is everything.
Yeah, because we all have that, like at least a little bit of unconscious incompetence. Like we just don't know what we don't know. So
Exactly.
having an outsider to point it out is extremely valuable.
Exactly.
And when it comes to the mobility side of things, like I'd love to go down that rabbit hole a little bit before we run out of time. Well,
Mhm.
when it comes to mobility in your specific situation, what exactly are you working on? And what are some like techniques that have been working really well that you think somebody listening, if they are in the population of people like, say, menopausal women that we just mentioned, like that they might be able to take into their own routine and improve their results and their pain tolerance or whatever they got going on?
Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes to mobility, I think that a it gets a confusing term. It's a confusing term because people don't understand what it really means. The way that I use it is having strength throughout the entire range of motion that you have access to. Now, I do take it a step further. If I know that your structure should allow for more range of motion and you don't have access to it, that tells me that you currently do not have strength within that range of motion. So my goal to build your mobility is to unlock that end range. Because if I can get you really strong at your end range, chances are all the angles and degrees prior to the end range is also going to be strong, right? Um, First and foremost, going back to the basics. If you are training your resistance training movements through a full range of motion and at a meaningful intensity, a large portion of your mobility will come from that. Somebody that can get into a full blown squat against resistance, you're going to have great external rotation of the hips, great range of motion through the spine, so on and so forth. That doesn't mean that we can't tune some things up, but back to being simplistic, full range of motion, resistance training. That will be huge for a majority of people because most people don't even do that. But
Yeah.
if you want to take it a step further, I think the biggest bang for most people's buck is to focus on the hips. If we can start to use strategies that will mobilize the hip's ability to move, because it's a ball and socket joint, the spine and pelvis do not have to shift and twist in ways to make the movement work, right? And just in my line of work, so many people come to see me because their lower back is either overworked or just completely injured, right? So,
Yeah.
those who are looking to open up their hips, I'm going to say very general exercises here that you will be able to find on YouTube. So, starting with your hip flexion or bringing your hip to your tummy, you could start with that, which is to say the couch stretch. It's a miserable exercise, miserable stretch. It's a lot of tension, but if you can work into it, you're going to be able to really open up your hip's ability to move. Technically, that's hip
I
extension,
know
but
there's I know there's probably a handful of clients listening to this right now of mine that are like, "Oh, don't even bring that back into the rotation. Please no."
the so when I think about hip internal and hip external rotation, a very simplistic opener for external rotation would be the pigeon pose. Now that's a stretch that I would eventually want to build into an actual exercise, but I'm just speaking to a very gen pop entry level person. For hip internal rotation, what I would love for somebody to do is if they were laying on their side in basically the fetal position, They would put something between their knees and they will kick that top leg out and up. They're going to feel a massive contraction in their side of their hips, and that's going to tell me that the right muscles are contracting. So if you just did, once again, pigeon pose, just stretching, making sure that you're active within it, the couch stretch, squeezing your glutes, really leaning forward, and then you do the side lying ankle raise. That would be great starting points for those who haven't even tried hip specific end range strengthening. And of course, like, man, it goes into a million different veins. But I picked three movements that I think almost anybody can do that can just at least give them a taste of what it feels like to start training their end range.
Yeah, no, those are huge, and it just made me feel so good. I'm like, they're in the program, yes. But but it also reminded me of bringing Justin back up. One time we were like messing around on the floor, and he's like, "All right, try and do a side plank, but in the fetal position to start, and use your knee and your elbow to push you up." And I'm just like, "Yeah, how hard can that be?" And I was like shaking like a freaking like I don't even know what. And I'm just like, "Oh my God." But then when you get good at that stuff, all of a sudden your hips feel so good.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And to your point, so I think this would be really cool. So two things that happen during mobility training that's very common and people get scared is you'll either cramp or you'll
Hmm.
be unbelievably shaky. And that is more so a sign that you are in uncharted territory for your nervous system. Great way to explain this is if you're cramping, that's your body saying, I don't know what's going on, but we're shutting this down. Let's take a break here. And the more that you kind of rev up a contraction in that position and then back off right before it cramps, the less you'll cramp over time. And then if you are shaking, it's your body trying to figure out how to fire muscles at the right rate to stabilize properly. If everything is a push and pull tug of war on both sides of the joint, you have to wait until they normalize and fire at the same rate. Therefore, you have a sturdy structure. So that shaking is your brain just learning. So embrace the shake, embrace the cramps, because that's actually the route to moving and feeling better.
Love that. I know there's probably so many people listening right now that are just like, okay, at least I'm not crazy. Like that's miserable. I just want the acknowledgement.
I'm
But
validating thoughts.
yes, and I think this also leads into another good topic, which is like the whole concept of hamstrings and hip flexors and like how they play off each other. Because I know there's a lot of people that feel like their hamstrings are so tight, but in
Mhm.
reality, it's because their hip flexors are so weak, or it could be a number of different things, which leads to cramping, which leads to these shaky movements. Have you experienced that? And like, if so, what exactly seems to help a lot of people in that situation?
Yeah. I will say, as a disclaimer, those who are feeling stiffness, it doesn't necessarily have to be a direct cause of the inability to get into deep ranges of motion with their muscles, right? So we know that there is those who are hypermobile with like a connective tissue disease where they could put their leg behind their head, not even feel a stretch with that, and they will claim to feel very stiff. And I know that also those that have, let's say, rheumatoid arthritis, they can still touch their toes, but they'll still feel stiffness in their hamstrings. So I think that increase inflammation and let's just say perception of stress can also make us feel stiff and tight, right? So I just want to make sure that we know that it doesn't always go to the inability to get into deeper ranges. But I do notice that if we're picking areas that have been heavily neglected by the person when it comes to stretching and all that, I think the person, if they stretch, is going to be maybe a quad stretch where they bring their heel to their butt. And I think that maybe they try to reach for their toes, if that. I'll play this game. If you were to do that, but you were to maximize that stretch by not making it passive, but actually turning it into active, you would get so much results. So, for example, quad stretch, bringing your heel to your butt, squeeze your glutes so that thigh goes more backwards. You're going to feel a massive stretch across your quad and your hip flexor. Now that you're in this deep end range, keep that position with your hand, reverse it. Try to extend your leg against your hand. That's going to fire the front of your leg, mainly your quadricep, and that's actually going to allow you to go further back. So this is called reciprocal inhibition. Fancy term. Basically just says that you're using the other side of the joint to stretch the other side of the joint. And if you can do this push and pull metric, you'll gain mobility within the session. Because a lot of the reasons why we can't get deeper into a range of motion is just a neurological safeguard. Your body's like, I don't trust you there. I'm not letting you go there. But that push and pull is a conversation with your nervous system saying, hey, you can handle this. So I think that would be the biggest takeaway when it comes to mobility training is take your stretches, make them meaningful as if you're training them like a resistance training movement. And I think that most people would get a tremendous outcome from it.
Yeah, and you just answered my question right before I was going to ask because I think I know at least myself, like being a fitness professional, I have seen people preach and talk about the importance of it's great to stretch. It's even better to make it active, like whether through resistance training or the techniques that you talked about. And I'm always just like, why? But the fact that you're having that neurological conversation and improving coordination and understanding your body awareness, that makes total sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope it does. I just every time I think I'm clear, I hope I'm clear. So the fact that you're saying it's allowing me to know that my ability to simplify it is becoming more concise.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only thing that I think came up was the fact that, like you said, end range of motion, and it's like we all know that's a stretch. That's pretty
Yeah.
much it. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's huge. And I think everybody listening got so much out of this. This is probably one of the more in-depth talks I've done in a while, most like packed episodes. So thank you so much for contributing
Of
and
course.
being an incredible guest.
Hey man, like I said earlier in the podcast, it's been amazing to actually be on the other side of things, right? And of course that we with our own podcast, we're kind of like almost in our own echo chamber. So to be able to
Mhm.
step out, right, and then just experience different approaches is really cool.
Absolutely. Now, if anybody heard you and they're like, damn, this guy knows a lot of good stuff. I heard him talk about these exercises. I wonder if he puts it on his socials. Like, where can they find you?
If you made it this far, thank you. I know that I speak in a way that can confuse some people. So thanks for being here. So Instagram would be Dr. So Dr. period Brandon period Parker. And then I also have a podcast as well. It's called the Revival Method. You can find that tagged in all my social media accounts. That's kind of like you might be in the same line of thought here, but I feel like this is the medium that really reaches people in a way that actually is meaningful, right? Whereas a 15-second clip, I'm like, hey, do this exercise. People will see it and then just move on to the next thing. Whereas I hope after an hour long podcast, people are like, this is actually something that I can take actionable steps on.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. The podcast is where it's at because the people that care actually learn and they listen and they get the most out of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, totally agree. Now, as a thank you for Dr. Parker coming on, if you're listening right now and you heard anything at any point that really resonated and you know somebody in your life that has been struggling with pain or like needs this nutrition info that we mentioned, go ahead and send it their way. Tell them we say hi and they will definitely thank you for it, especially if you get them out of pain, as I'm sure a chiropractor can tell you, pain-free people are happier people.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Awesome, awesome. So again, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Parker, and thank you everybody for listening all the way through. I will see you all next time, but until then, go kick some ass. See you later.